Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's episode of the BigFooty Bombercast. And it's a much, much happier Bombercast this week because, of course, you are listening to the post-Hawthorne version of the Bombercast. And we, of course, finally got a victory. Now, I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Grizz. But before I throw to Grizz, just as a heads up, later on in the podcast, we will be talking to a Swans poster. So, Milky from the Swans board, he was on the Swans podcast for Big Footy. He will be joining us to talk about all things Sydney in preparation for this weekend's upcoming game. But Grizz, Saturday night, how good was it?
Oh, look, if you're going to win any game, you want to be beating Hawthorne. It was great to watch. And especially I was away. I was sort of out most of the day. And the first I heard of the 5 laid outs was at about 7:19 as I sat down to watch the footy. It's just sort of made it all the better. But what a win. And, even if we don't win another game for a while, the look on Sam Mitchell's face after the siren makes it all worth it.
It does. I do just look... This may get edited out because, of course, we don't like to talk positive about Sam Mitchell as Essendon fans. But I will just say very briefly, his press conference was fairly impressive because the media were trying to get him to basically say that Essendon didn't deserve to win and that Hawthorn lost it. And he steadfastly just kept giving us credit. So I actually didn't mind his press conference, but I will admit I did get a certain amount of pleasure out of how sad and frustrated he looked in the coach's box afterwards. His bottom lip could not have got any lower.
It would have been hard, in the sense that he probably he had to expect a better performance in that second half than they did. But I think to sort of what you just said, you don't keep the last 7 goals of the game like we did without any sort of due effort on our behalf. And I think we should probably start with the man, the myth, the legend that is Peter Wright, who kicked 6 straight. His goal kicking just in general is unbelievable, but he's 23 goals for the year now. You and I sort of talked before the year that he might be a good second or third tall forward. He might well be a number 1 at this point.
You're right. He's definitely come on a lot better than we sort of hoped. I think at the start of the year in our preview podcast and throughout the podcast, we have said this year that we don't think he's the number 1 forward and that he makes a great number 2, but he's not the forward you build your lineup around. But I mean, performances like last night, and he did it, last year against the Bulldogs as well. And he and you're right, he has kicked 23 goals this year, so he is averaging, he's almost his 3 goals a game type thing. So maybe he is that forward you can build a side around, build a forward 50 around. I think, as good as he was, I think he certainly benefited last night by having other multiple targets around him. Having Baldwin, Francis, and Brian, or even Draper, although I think Draper spent most of his rest on the bench as opposed to up forward. I think that just helped Wright a lot because if you sort of watch the replay, Baldwin and Francis, they didn't kick the 6 goals. Francis kicked 2, Baldwin kicked 1, and they didn't dominate like Peter did, but they did a lot of leading away from Peter. And it sounds silly to say that, but it just means that he was able to sort of get that free run and jump at the ball as opposed to having to somehow try and outmark 4 blokes in front of him while his teammates stand around dimly staring at him, hoping him to take mark of the year every time.
I think we talked about this last few weeks where Peter Wright just sort of looked less potent because he had 4 guys zoning off their opponents. Because, when it's Guelphy, Waterman and Baldwin, they're not really going to honour those guys aerially. And I'm still not sold on Aaron Francis as a forward, but one thing he does do is jump at the footy in a way which as a defender makes you nervous. And really that's all you really want because that means that the defenders aren't preoccupied with Peter Wright. And his ability to stretch out. And he was on, I think it was Sam Frost at one point, who's, 6'5", pretty rangy guy. He made him look small when they were stretching out for the footy in the marking contest. And you forget he's 6'8" and he moves quite well. But I want to ask you, you've been sort of, I'm going to call you sort of the president/chairman of the Nick Bryan Draper combo fan club. You've been championing this, I reckon, since about round 2. Take your flowers, Bonso. How did you find it on the weekend?
Yeah, look, I liked it. I thought it worked well. I probably wasn't as big on Draper's game as some others, maybe. I still think Draper was pretty disappointing for 2.5 quarters last night. His last quarter, we don't get on top in the middle without his ruck work. There's no 2 ways about it. His ruck work in that last quarter absolutely won us that game. And I think Zach Merritt said today that he's actually been ill throughout the week. So it was a pretty big effort for him to get up and for him to show something in that last quarter. Says even more about his character, really. But I just thought that having Brian there as the chop out just meant that Draper was able to just go that little bit harder, because the problem with when you put a Baldwin or a Wright in as the second ruck, as we've said before, you take Wright out of the forward line, who are we kicking it to? Baldwin as a second ruck is just insanity. Having a second ruck allows Draper to go his goofiest and hardest for 10 minutes, 15 minutes and a quarter, knowing that he's got somebody there who can then take over and take the reins. And I thought Brian, the times when he went in last night was good. I thought, unfortunately for him, he made probably the best spoil of the night running back into the defensive 50 when he...
Yes.
That was his closing speed to get to that was just amazing for a ruckman. And then unfortunately hit it down Jack Gunston's throat. And Jack Gunston couldn't have hit the side of a barn last night. His goal kicking was terrible. But of course, the one time Nick Bryan does something brilliant, Gunston manages to actually slot it through the middle. So I liked it. I thought it was something that worked well, and I think it's something that we should continue to work on in the future. And the thing is, I suppose, it was a move that Truck had already made prior to the 5 late changes. So it is not a move that was made out of necessity. It was a predetermined move, and I think one that they'll stick with in the coming weeks.
I think Truck's shown a willingness to go with 2 rucks. I think he played Draper and Phillips both earlier this year. I think it was probably more just he didn't think Ryan was ready. And look, to some extent, he probably isn't, but it's not about readiness at this point. I think with Nick Bryan, this is his 3rd year, but not really going for anything this year in terms of finals, placings and stuff. Just get minutes into him. And I agree. I think Draper, he only had 4 disposals, which seems like it felt like he had more in the game, but that 4th quarter, some of those breaking, sort of those clearances where he got the ball and just sprinted forward were a sight to behold. He did get torched a bit going back the other way. Max Lynch sort of got a hold of him in the first half, but I think Draper was a bit more disciplined in the second half. I wanted to ask you about the much sort of talked about midfield. I thought Zach Merritt and Darcy Parish got plenty of the ball as normal, but you and I talked last week about Darcy Parish's sort of, with J-Mill, of course, Darcy Parish's sort of hurt factor. Much better kick to handball ratio this week, 16 disposals, 16 kicks and handballs each, 440 metres gained. Zach looked probably a bit rusty to kick in that first half, but came home with a wet sail. And I just thought the midfield was way more balanced this week. I think Jai Caldwell had a low number of disposals, but you could tell when he and Ben Hobbs were in there, they cracked in hard. And sort of that group turned the clearances because, Andrew McGrath spent a lot of time in defence and did really well, sort of shut down Luke Bruce really effectively. And Dylan Shields sort of had a rough night, unfortunately. And he looks like he's just labouring at the moment, both mentally and physically. But I thought the midfield had a much better day, far more attacking. We talked about the handball and kick ratio last week. It was much better this week. I think it was, plus 90 kicks to handballs this week as opposed to negative 30 the week before. And not that it was completely perfect. We got opened up the other way a couple of times, but the forwards looked better because I think the midfield were more proactive in their ball use. Yeah,
so absolutely. The midfield was certainly more balanced last night. And you mentioned the kick to handball ratio, and I worked it out and actually mentioned it earlier today on the board that, our kick to handball ratio last night was 1.72. So that means that for every handball, you're giving off 1.72 kicks. Now, it doesn't sound massive, but then if you compare it to the Bulldogs, where the ratio is 1.12, Collingwood 1.02, and Fremantle 1.11. Last night, they definitely put an emphasis on getting the ball in the boot and actually moving it forward. They didn't really do those handballs. There was one late in the game again. It was halfway through that last quarter, so it wasn't quite as late as I indicated. But Archie Perkins led up at the ball and they handballed it to him. He had to do the U-turn, and to his credit, he turned around and he hit a target, and we went back and we kicked the goal. But it just made me pull my hair out slightly because a bloke's leading up here at the ball. Don't handball it to him. What are you doing?
The 30-metre handballs to people coming on the lead. It's like, why don't you just kick it? The last 4 weeks, we were talking about the handball to kick ratio. Last night, it was plus 94 kicks. The 3 weeks before that, we're averaging about negative 23. So we had 23 on average, 23 more handballs and kicks over the last 3 weeks that we had lost. So it just shows when we're proactively, taking the game on, driving through our legs and kicking to targets instead of handballing in circles. Yeah, look, defensively, we probably opened ourselves up a bit at times, but we just look so much more attacking when we got it right, which is probably in that 3rd and 4th quarter.
And I think one player that's underrated from last night, and it's the bloke that He's been maligned in the past, but we're all starting to really love him now, and that's Laverde again. I thought his early work was amazing. He was single-handedly repelling Hawthorne for us early in that first quarter. He just kept getting the ball time and time again, would run off his man, would back himself in. And the thing that really helped him last night, and it's something that we've all been screaming at again for a while, and this was a move that came out of necessity, was the introduction of Zerk Thatcher and Zach Reed. So we actually had two tall targets, two tall defenders down there alongside Laverde, which just helped him play into his strengths. It didn't mean that he had to try and give away 8 or 9 centimeters and still be able to intercept and still try and rebound. He was able to just get on somebody his own size, have them covered in the air, and then do his thing. So, yeah, I was very impressed last night, and I'll be very disappointed if next week we go back to just trying to play him as a key position defender, because I think that's a waste of time. And maybe as amazing as he's been very good for us since he's come across. But maybe it does mean that Jake Kelly doesn't have a spot in the side, because at the moment, if you're looking at our back line, as I said, I would much rather have 2 tall timbers down there alongside Laverde rather than Laverde, a tall timber, and Jake Kelly as the third. And look, Jake's done nothing wrong, so that's the problem. But just from a team balance point of view, we looked much better having 2 tall defenders down there.
Yeah, I would stop short of Jake Kelly being left out of the team. I understand the point you're making. I do agree that we need 2 genuine key defenders plus Laverde. We've been trying to get away with Jordan Ridley playing as a key defender, or Laverde, and playing those 3 sort of Ridley, Laverde, and one of Reed or Zerk Thatcher as our defence. And we just get caught out for height too often. I think you should be playing all 4. You should be playing Ridley, Laverde, Reed, and another tall. I think Kelly's been our strongest one-on-one defender this year, so you can't leave him out. For me, in reality, I think it's you're taking Heppel out of defence, moving him up the ground, and Jake Kelly takes his spot. So really, it's Redmond, Kelly, Ridley, Reed, Laverde, your extra tall, and Cutler or Hind. And then there's your 7 defenders. And then you have Heppel up further up the field in another role. But I understand what you're saying in that they looked better. I think when Laverde plays off his man, so he follows his man and attacks the ball using his forward as a reference point, he's really quite effective. He gets led to the ball and then just sort of beats him one-on-one. He got caught out a couple times, I reckon, trying to play in the zone, trying to guard 2 people, and it was his man that was getting out the back a couple of times. But that was more because, we were caught on the hop and he was trying to guard 2 people. But it's an interesting configuration about our defence, because I agree with you that we need the sort of 3 talls plus Ridley, with Laverde being one of those 3 talls. But I'm not sure how you fit it if you don't move Heppel out of there.
Yeah, and look, I actually don't see another spot for Heppel on the field at the moment, so I don't think they'll move him, which is where I think Jake Kelly gets squeezed. But I do think he would be a better option. I actually thought Heppel torched Bruce last night as well, which was pleasing to see, because Luke Bruce has had a habit in the past of taking us apart. So credit to Heppel there. But the other end of the ground, the forward line, we already sort of briefly touched on how having the other 2 targets helped Peter Wright a little bit, but there is one man that I want to talk about. And look, I'm going to have a 2-second rant, because I don't understand the football club at times, because Friday they told us that Devon Smith was no good. He was 2 weeks. He couldn't play. Saturday night he turns around and plays. Now, I thought he actually played very well. And he was almost the Devon Smith of old. He laid 6 tackles. His pressure was good. It was strong. Yes, he gave away some dumb free kicks, which, Devon does, but if he's going to give away some dumb free kicks and sort of fly the flag at the same time, those situations I don't mind. It's when he gives away a dumb free kick because the bloke's kicked it, and then Devon thumps into him and he gives the free kick 50 metres down the field. Those sort of free kicks shit me. But last night, I thought was very good. So my question to you is, Grizz, do you think it's acceptable for the football club to have said on Friday that he is not fit enough to play a VFL and then to play him in the AFL? I don't care if they... I would have preferred if they'd come out and said, look, we don't want him to play VFL. We're going to give him 2 weeks to get his knee, because they say it's his knee that he's injured again. We're going to give him 2 weeks to get his knee back. Then we'll see how he goes. He may play AFL. He may play VFL. I thought they sort of disrespected the fans a little.
Yeah, that was really weird. So that was another thing where I sat down to watch the TV just before the game started, and I saw Devon Smith on the team sheet and went, huh? What? Is there another D Smith on our list somewhere that I've just completely missed? But yeah, that's bizarre. To answer the question, I think your original question, I think it's a bit loaded. Is it acceptable? Well, it is because we pay attention anyway. Is it a good idea? Probably not. And look, to be honest, like before Zach Merritt came back from his syndesmosis after 4 weeks, so like, oh yeah, he's tracking well. He should be able to. He'll be back in sort of in game simulation at training, hopefully next week. And then next thing we know, he's named to play. And Jake Stringer was the same with his groin before he did his hand injury when he came back for Anzac Day. So it's almost getting to a point where we shouldn't trust the injury report, which is a really sad place to be, I think. I don't think it's a good way to engage with your membership if you're basically openly lying to them about the health status of the players in the sense of a player like preparedness to play. And I don't know. Yeah, I think I agree with you that he was pretty good last night, like the best he's looked all year, but that was very bizarre. I'm not entirely sure what happened there. Yeah, it was weird. Anyway, I just want to talk about your man, Nick Crichton. We're going to call him Nick Crichton Martin.
Oh, no. I reckon we should call him Nick Brownlow Martin because I reckon he's on the way. If he doesn't win the Rising Star this year, I mean, if the Rising Star was done now, he would absolutely have to win it. He's been the best young player so far, and David King on Fox Footy keeps bringing up Rising Star and still basically refuses to mention him. So if you ever needed a hint that David King was a dickhead, that's definitely right there a sign, because how can you sit there and mention blokes like Josh Rashali for the Rising Star and not mention Nick Martin, who has been the best young player so far this year?
Yeah.
I'm fired up, Grizz.
Nah, look, I genuinely think he could win the Crichton. If I just ended polling now, he may well win it. Like, which is unbelievable for a guy that's played 8 games. But I wonder if the fact he's 21 this year counts against him. All the sort of guys who's going up against 18, and I'm not saying it's a good reason, but if you look over the history of the Rising Star, guys who are a bit older generally will be deferred. They'll generally defer to give the award to the younger guy. I remember like when Heppel won it, I think in 2012 or 2011. Luke Shuey probably had the better year statistically, but it was Luke Shuey's 3rd year, so they gave it to Heppel because he was younger. So I think that's probably the tiebreaker at the moment in the media. But he absolutely should be getting more talk. Like he's kicked, I think it's 10 goals this year in 8 matches as a wingman, and he's averaging like 23 disposals. Like it's just unbelievable.
West Coast to be kicking themselves.
Oh, he's been running around the state league for 2 years. Like, how has no one picked up on this kid? It's just, it's unbelievable. And wouldn't West Coast love him at the moment? But they can keep their grubby mitts off of him. Thank you very much.
Well, if he decides to go home, let's hope we get a Tim Kelly style trade for him. But the other example, of course, which we all still love to remember, is Andrew McGrath won the Rising Star against Ryan Burton, which in his 2nd year, which of course Hawthorn fans went into a meltdown about. So
Ryan Brontone, don't you mean?
Yeah. who of course now according to Hawthorn fans, he actually isn't that good, and they were happy to get rid of him. So. How times have changed, but the one more player I do want to quickly touch on before we let Milky get a word in edgewise, and that is Ben Hobbs. He kicked his first goal. We all went nuts. Then of course score review. I think it was touched as much as we hate it. As a side note, completely unrelated. I actually watched the game without commentary last night, without any sound. I was at a bar, so I didn't watch it. Didn't have any issues with the umpiring, and I actually didn't notice them as much, probably because there wasn't as much. I didn't hear the commentators debate their decisions for 5 minutes. So I actually probably thought the umpiring was pretty decent last night. But
we'll agree to disagree there.
As I said, mate, I didn't see. I only saw the game, so from what I could see, I didn't think they missed a great deal. The Peter Wright one got a bit of. I know that got a bit of excitement from a few people on the board, but as I have heard the replay since, he didn't need to do it. It's a pretty dumb thing to do, but.
Oh no, the Peter Wright one, 100% there. Like, let's be really clear. Like I think you mean on the Redmond goal or non-goal.
Which by the way, I was at a sports bar and we were all in a bloody group hug. We were in a bigger hug, a bigger pile-on than the players were on the ground before we realised what had happened.
No, that was 100%. 110% free kick against Peter Wright. I watched it on the replay and went, right, okay. The thing that got my goad was we got the 150-metre penalty for dissent all night. Like for, I think it was Aaron Francis putting his hands up in the air. And then 2 minutes later, 2 Hawthorn guys did the exact same thing. Nothing.
I'll be honest. I'll be honest. I didn't see them do that, but I did see I thought Francis was fair enough because he had his hands up for a fair while.
But it's just inconsistent. Yeah, we don't want to rag on the umpires too much, but the inconsistency of that rule 2 weeks into its implementation is bizarre. But to the original point, Ben Hobbs, only 19 touches, but he just cracks in. His tackling was, I thought, strong point. He had 4 tackles, a couple of them inside 50, and when he latches on, like he's like a clam. It was quite incredible. I think he's a goer, and I think if McGrath's going to play more time in defence, which it seems like he is, I think the 4-man midfielder rotation of Hobbs, Caldwell, Parrish and Merritt seem to look really good at times, particularly in clearance situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I thought Hobbsy was very good, and I thought it was great to see him actually played in the midfield in that second half, and he had 11 touches in that second half, which, as you said, it doesn't sound like huge numbers, but for a bloke who went into midfield probably one of the first times, it was actually pretty handy. And I did say I wanted to mention Ben Hobbs, but there is one more bloke, and you did mention him earlier about poor old Dylan Shield. I will just say this about Dylan Shield last night. He actually led the clearances for us in that last quarter. So for all the shit he gets for missing that goal, and he absolutely missed that goal, he should have kicked that goal. I still think he did 4 or 5 really good things, and they just get completely missed because of that one mistake. And that's the definition of a whipping boy right there. He makes one mistake. That's what we remember.
He looks like a guy who has the weight of the world on his shoulders. Like, he just looks like a guy that knows he's under the microscope. I think unfairly. Like, everyone talks about his defensive efforts. Yeah, they were poor, but he's not Robinson Crusoe there. Like, you can point out any of the other midfielders, bar maybe Zach Merritt, and put serious question marks up against their defensive effort for the last month. But with that set shot, you could tell he didn't want to have it. He didn't want the shot. Like, he's just like, it's almost like, if I miss this, oh no, they're going to come for me. And it's a horrible place to be as a footballer. And the shame is, like you said, he actually does plenty of good things, but people are just sort of waiting on that terrible thing. And he just looks like, he's got the weight of expectation on his shoulder. And he's a good player. He'll find his way out of it. But I agree with you. I think last night was nowhere near as bad as maybe some people or some posters on the board thought it was.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good spot for us to end the review of the Hawthorne game, Grizz, because we do have a man from the Sydney Swans board sitting patiently waiting to chime in about this upcoming clash between the Dons and the Swans. Milky, how are you, my friend?
Good, mate. Good. Pleasure of being here. This is my first opposition board podcast to be on, so thank you very much for having me on.
Now, mate, I'll start you off with a nice softball question that I know Essendon fans will be very eager to hear you answer. What's it like going to a game every week knowing that if things go to shit, the AFL, then by extension, the umpires are going to bail you out?
Oh, Jesus. Welcome to the podcast, Milky. Wowzers. All right.
What a way to make my blood boil.
I just thought I'd throw one out there early, mate, and go whack early. And before moving on to more pleasurable topics.
Well, I'd have to know what it's like to have like a blue dye on my shirt at the same time as the red and the white to know what getting umpire support feels like.
Look, I don't think you're going to get any arguments from any Essendon fans with that. But we are diving into the Swans versus Essendon. And Milky, Grizz and I have spoken about this off air before, and we'll get your perspective. But we both think that the Swans and the Bombers is probably an underrated rivalry. And I have done a bit of research, and the last time that the two sides drew was back in 1996. And since that game, we've played 39 times for 26 results of 4 goals or less. So which means, 2 out of every 3 games seems to be a relatively close match, whether it be Lockett after the siren, Steve Alessio with 30 seconds left, or Goods missing after the siren, or even Gary Rowan molesting Marty Gleeson in the goal square. It does.
Dane Rampy, scaling halfway up a goalpost.
Dan Rampy climbing the goalpost. It does seem that this clash seems to throw up closer results than normal.
You also left out the Essendon flag that played on the siren.
Courtney Dempsey.
Oh,
yes.
Courtney Dempsey. Oh,
how can we forget that one?
I still haven't replaced the hole in the wall. That was unbelievable.
It does feel like a slightly underrated rivalry because there has been so many close finishes in recent time. But other than probably, I want to say 2017, we haven't really faced in finals much from my memory.
No, not since 96. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of modern day rivalries seem to be generated from finals clashes. Like Geelong Hawthorne immediately springs to mind, GWS Western Bulldogs as well. Other than like your classic, Big Four Melbourne club rivalries, most of the modern ones are done. Even Sydney West Coast was based on the grand finals and the finals that we played against each other. So because we haven't had those tight finishes in finals, people probably don't think of it as much as a rivalry. But going into this game, I just know either one way or the other, it's going to be a 2-goal margin.
We actually did play them again in finals in 99. So there was another one between 96, and that was actually Plugger's last ever game before his ill-fated comeback in 2002.
I was 4 then, so I don't think I remember it.
Yeah. So I think Bont and I talked about this sort of off air, which was I think the last 5 matches have all been 7 points or less. So I had this deep anxiety whenever we play Sydney that I'm just going to chew my fingernails down to the quick, and that's because his last few times we played, which is the last 5 times, sorry, it's just been super tight, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if style makes fights. I don't know if it's just the SCG. The dimensions of it always generally end up making a closer game because centre clearances are worth so much value if you can get them at the SCG. But
for sure.
It's always a really good game, and Essendon scores a lot from centre clearances, which is probably how we're able to hang on against Sydney at the SCG. But it's always a good match, and something weird always happens. We're joking about Dan Rampy and Adam Good's missing after the siren, and Tony Lockett in 90s. Something weird is bound to happen in one of those games.
Even last year, it was like I didn't watch a lot of Essendon games last year, but I feel like that was the only game where Jake Stringer just decided to be a great midfielder. I think he got I'm exaggerating, but I think he got 15 center clearances and 5 of them led straight to goals. He kicked himself. It was just like the one game where Stringer just went, you know what? I want to win this game. Fuck everybody else.
Yeah.
And he didn't do much since,
Last year, I remember we got off to a 4-goal lead. This is round 4 or something. And I thought, we're on here. And then Sydney just mowed us down. And that last quarter was pure mayhem.
Just goal for goal.
Yeah, it's just Tom Hickey gave, I think it was Sam Draper, a ruckman at the time, a bath, and really won that game for you guys. But I think clearances in the ruckman this week is probably going to be crucial considering SCG is such a clearance dominant ground.
Which makes me really happy we're finally getting Ruck Jesus back.
So Hickey's
Tom Hickey
this week, is he?
He played reserves last week, and he split the ruck duties in the reserves, and Laddams played in the seniors. So I can't see a reason why Hickey wouldn't come back.
I was looking at the VFL game. I think Tom Hickey played full game. It says he dominated 23 disposals, a goal, 6 clearances, and 26 hit-outs. So he sounds like just in time to kick our butts.
I hope so.
Yeah, it's interesting, Milky, because I actually have thought that Laddams has done fairly well in Hickey's absence, but he did get towed up by Witts, who is one of the form ruckmen of the league, no doubt. But just in general, I thought I actually watched the Swans and the Suns on the weekend, and the Suns were, they played all right, but I thought the Swans just struggled. You've certainly started the season off on a fly. You're 5-1 at one stage, and you got beaten by Brisbane, which let's be honest, getting beaten by Brisbane at the moment is not exactly a shock to most sides. I think, if I was a Swans fan, and I would have been just disappointed with how they turned up against the Suns.
Oh, absolutely disappointed. It's like the past 3, maybe even 4 weeks, probably not so much against the Eagles because, let's be real, it's the Eagles at the moment. They're lucky that they can, field a side. We've played maybe 3 quarters to a quarter and a half a game. And in that time, we've won the game, essentially, except against Brisbane. But against that game against Brisbane, Buddy kicked 4 goals in 10 minutes. And we went from 5 goals down to, I think we even may have hit the front at one stage. I didn't get to watch it properly. So we play really well in that patch, but we haven't put together a full game yet. Even going back against the game against the Bulldogs that we lost, we didn't play the first half. We kicked a total of 9 for the first half of the game and only lost by I think by 9 in the end anyway. So we aren't playing 4-quarter footy, and it was really evident last week against the Suns. We just couldn't get out of second gear. But when we got forward momentum, we would butcher it going for goal. Heaney is someone I would probably put most of my money on to kick a goal at any point, particularly it's snapshots. He takes snaps, set shots really, really well, almost better than kicking a drop punt. He kicked 0-3 for the game and we ended up losing by 14. He kicks those goals, we win. So we have not played a full game yet. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this loss against the Gold Coast was really the kick up the arse we desperately needed.
I think you can take another week before you get that kick up the arse, mate. I don't think you need 4 quarters.
I'm hoping it's not. Look, if you just want to play like a quarter and a half, 2 quarters against us, fine by us. Like, just,
if it helps, we did that against Hawthorne and won by 40.
Yeah,
right, okay.
just not to point out, we only played a quarter against Hawthorne and beat them by 27. So how good's Hawthorne travelling right now?
So by that logic, we win by 13.
Well, basically.
Yeah, okay.
One area which I think is going to be interesting for the Bombers and the Swans is the midfield battle, which we mentioned. Yeah, the Swans probably they're still, I think, similar to Essendon in that they don't really have that express pace midfielder out there. Is that a fair? I mean, I think Chad Warner's got a bit of toe about him, doesn't he? And he's been pretty handy this year. But
so Warner's quick off the pace. You'll find if you watch most of it, if he can play on after like taking a mark or break out of a stoppage, he's gone. Like he is absolutely gone to the point where he actually got caught holding the ball because he took a mark, went to play on, and the guy who was coming to take the mark was like 20 centimeters from him, just wrapped him up. So like he just goes, and it's great to see. But outside of really Mills and Heaney, when he does a brief stints in there because he spends a lot of time forward, we don't have a big-bodied, quick mid to just win contested ball, break from stoppage, and like push it forward. Parker's been dealing with a bit of a hamstring issue, and Kennedy's, despite being an absolute champion, he's getting on a bit, and he was never the quickest.
No, he wasn't. He was always a very much use his size to burst through.
Use his size, use his hands to give it to a Hanbury who could burst from stoppage. We don't have that, other than Mills isn't like quick, but he thinks quick and he's got good skills. Yeah. But he doesn't burst from stoppage.
He's functionally fast, which is like in the sense that he's fast enough to get done what he needs to do. We were talking about Josh Kennedy historically, and Bonds, I'm sure, will probably attest to this. Historically speaking, Josh Kennedy's a midfielder that just seems to have 35, 8 clearances, 11 tackles, and a couple goals against us just about every time he plays. But it's interesting with him not playing so much in the midfield, and probably he seems to be playing more sort of off half back at the moment.
Wing, yeah. They've moved him out to that more, that just because our defense is a bit young, for lack of a better word, a bit more inexperienced than it used to be. Like back in the day, you'd always say, "Oh, Sydney's defense is like the best best defense in the league." Ted Richards, Heath Grundy, Dane Rampy, you could just rattle them off and off. Like Nick Smith, you can rattle them off. Just excellent one-on-one defenders. We don't have that much as anymore. Sure. So we've moved Kennedy more onto the wing half back to trying to like shore up the back line, but it hasn't worked. His best game was when he's the sub, and he can come in late, be fresh, and when everyone's already half a pace off it, he kind of like matches up and he can just do what Kennedy does and just brute force his way into it.
Yeah, so I suppose, with Kennedy out of the midfield, like historically it's the bigger sort of more powerful mids that used to give Essendon troubles. But I look at the size and sort of the skill set of the midfield, and they seem to match up pretty closely, with maybe Kennedy and Warner's sort of breakout pace being sort of the only differentiators in that sense. So it really will be, I think, the key to this game, I think, will be that the team that wins centre clearances and clearances in general are probably going to get on top. And this could be one of those ones where there's 3 or 4 goal swings everywhere. It just depends on who's winning clearances at any given time, particularly centre clearances. I think before this week, it's sort of one of the few ways we were able to score was centre bounce clearances, sort of, Draper and Parrish and Stringer before he was injured, sort of getting on the run and getting forward the stoppage. But I think our forward line probably still has a few more issues and relies on getting really strong one-on-one looks. And so, I think we've all tested that midfield's going to be key on Saturday.
It's going to be interesting to see how the Swans back line does go, because Hawthorne found out on Saturday night that 2 metre Peter, being so tall, that the shorter undersized sort of 195.
How tall is he?
Yeah, 2 metre Peter.
Oh, okay, cool.
They did find out that the 195 sort of undersized key position defenders don't work. And that's what the McCartan brothers are doing for Sydney at the moment a little bit, is they are playing that key position back. And look, Paddy McCartan's the story of the season for mine so far. His 100%. Comeback's been unbelievable. But Milky, who goes to Peter Wright? Because when he gets his big arms out, he's incredibly hard to stop. And it'll be the same problem we're going to have again with Lance Franklin at the other end.
It'll be Tom McCartan. That'll go to Peter Wright. Tom is much more of the... he's still a good intercept defender, very good good spoil, but he's better one-on-one than Paddy McCartan is, I'd say. So you would probably find Paddy will do more peeling off, intercepting, helping out, particularly if Rampy's occupying someone else. So I think Tom will be the first matchup for Peter Wright. But just on forward lines, I'm not worried about your talls. And I've never been worried about a tall in any Sydney game that we have had this year, because we get slaughtered by the smalls.
Oh, you're in luck. We don't have any smalls.
Yeah,
you're fine.
Our game plan at the moment is to either kick at the tip Peter Wright and have him pluck a mark, or have Nick Martin do something absolutely outrageous in his first season on the half-forward line. And that's how we're scoring goals right now.
There's no McDonald tip. There's no McDonald tipping Woody. He's still running around the VFL. You know, Will Snelling's out. Probably our most dangerous sort of medium at the moment, Archie Perkins, and he's a bit off the boil at the moment. Nick Martin somehow is second most prolific goal kicker, despite the fact he plays on a wing, which probably tells you how our forward line's going.
Well, watch him, because we have a tendency to let the small spuds, as I call them, shine against us in the forward lines. They have absolutely slaughtered us. Like, I think Jack Zeeble kicked 5. Isaac Rankin, who hasn't played well all year, kicked like 3 and got like 20 touches running off wing and pushing forward. It's absolutely the small forwards that will torch us. We are playing the best kick in the league as a lockdown small defender because we have no one else, and we're trying to teach him defensive pressure. Like, that is the state of our smalls.
Well, as Gris said, you'll be glad to know there's not too many, but I have just put a note down that in my same game multis this weekend, Nick Martin 2 goals plus to have.
I don't condone betting, but that is a sneaky one. I would, yeah, for sure. If you had if Tip and Woody was playing, he would be down for 5. Although I don't consider Tip and Woody a good player. I consider him a win more player, because every time I watch you guys play and you win, Tip and Woody does well, but he was never the difference maker. But when you lose, he's barely sighted all game. So I was never really worried about Tip and Woody. But this Nick Martin guy that I've never fucking heard of before, and I see averages 1.5 goals a game at the moment, he will kick 3.
So there is one Sydney player that I do want to talk about, and it's one that the Swans managed to find, because without their academy, he no doubt would never have picked up a Sharon, and that's Nick Blakey, because he's obviously best made discovered by the Swans, which is great. But the reason why I talk about him is Grizz. I see him as what I hope Nick Cox will be, in that he's a bloke that's the size of a key position back, but he plays as a halfback flanker running. And I said last week I love watching Sam Frost run prior to the Hawthorne game. And I'm going to say it again. I love watching Blakey run. Now, Blakey's much more skilled with ball in hand than Sam Frost, and he's much more coordinated. But, geez, when he takes off, as if it's not a baby giraffe just loping up the field with ball in hand. And it's something that I think, you know, when Eston finally decided to stop the Nick Cox experiment on the wing, that's the kind of player we're hoping Cox will end up being.
Yeah. He's a bit like Jack at Hawthorne, where like they're sort of that somewhere between 194, 196 centimetre guys that when you take off, you're like, oh, what's going to happen now? And it's either going to be really, really good, or it's going to blow up in your face. And you take that risk, because when it goes really well, you generally end up scoring. Yeah, I think he's the perfect example for Nick Cox, because, yeah, coming off half back, it's just so much easier to read the play than trying to play on a wing and get up and down the ground. Plays that link play, and yeah, it's just playing behind the football is a lot easier to adjust to, I think, for a young guy. And Nick Blake, he's not a young guy anymore. He's probably more an established player, but he'll be really key, because his drive off half back and through the wings when he is running off half back, it is super important, because he's an 80-metre player. He'll get it from half back to half forward in one possession.
Yeah. So what happened with Blakey was we tried playing him as a forward because of his height, but he's built like a wafer. He's just super thin. It wasn't quite working. We tried him in the middle, but he wasn't hard enough. He literally went to hip and shoulder someone once and bounced off them. We tried him on the wing, but he couldn't get the ball enough to use his pace and things like that. So he got dropped, got told to play halfback, and then he got fed the ball. And when he got fed the ball, he was breaking lines, not just with his pace, but with foot skills as well. So he's been a very good attacking halfback option, and he's always good for a spoil because of his height. So he averages, according to the stats, like over 500 meters gained a game. I can't find a stat for who has the most for the year. I can't find that, but he'd definitely be up there. We love getting the ball into Blakey's hands, because once he gets it, he'll take the game on. But yeah, he was tried in a lot of spots, and halfback seems to be where he is now. I personally would love to see him be pushed up to a wing, pushing the ball forward more, if we could get the ball into his hands on the wing more. But we would need to relook at our halfback flankers for that.
What changes are you looking at, do you reckon, for this week for your team? If you were to sack John Longmire and they were to hire Milky as coach?
The first change I would do is I love McLean. I think he's great and he's good for a goal and a half a game. And I think he takes pack marks really well. But with Buddy's age at the moment, they're kind of getting in each other's way, trying to be the stay-at-home full forward. It's just not quite working. I would drop McLean for Hickey and let Laddams be the second ruck, because we don't want Hickey solo rucking anymore. So we having those two rucks. Laddams is a better ruck than McLean, particularly around the ground, which would free up Hickey a bit. So I would drop McLean for Hickey, but play Laddams as a forward. I would drop Will Hayward simply for the fact that he gave up a 50-meter penalty after the umpire told him to move back 5 times, and he just didn't fucking move. So I would just drop him for stupidity alone. And so I would drop Hayward for O'Riordan, who is another kind of small defender halfback flanker. He did really well in the reserves. I would like to reward his form, which would hopefully allow Campbell, who has been playing as a small defender, to move up the ground, either in Hayward's role as a more of a pressure defense. Hayward's more of a just a medium forward, but just have him there and let Heaney play that medium forward role a bit more. And I would move Kennedy back to the sub-vest, and I would bring in Dylan Stevens just as a guy who can run and who has that ovation, which might help our speed in clearance. And I think it would give our midfield group a much better balance.
Problem with our changes, Chris, is it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because the team structured up really well on Saturday night, and that was more of because the coaching staff's hand was forced. They didn't really design that structure, but I thought it worked really well. So it will be interesting. The other bloke that I am worried about from the Swans is Tom Papley. Now, he's been fairly quiet this year. He's obviously only played the 2 games. He only kicked a goal into Gold Coast and was pretty quiet against Brisbane. He's the kind of player that Essendon will just let him rip right back into form and kick 4 or 5 and have the time of his life.
That'd be nice.
Wow, for you maybe, not so much for us, mate. But
yeah, we need Jake Kelly back for that matchup. Jake Kelly does a really good job on the smalls, and I think a lot of our changes, Bonts, will be dependent on who's not ill. I think we had 1, 2, 3, 4. We had 6 changes due to illness last week. Not COVID illness, that apparently, but just sort of a flu.
Yeah.
And so what changes we make and who comes back in will largely be dependent on health, I would imagine.
Well, lads, I think that'll just about do us for tonight. So, Milky, I'll grab your tip and just remember where you are.
I will remember that we're at the SCG and we don't play the SCG very well anymore, which probably leads more into an Essendon favour. But I think my head says Swans by probably no more than about a goal. My heart says Sydney by 24, because I think on paper we're a better side, but I know we're in bad form and we don't play our home ground very well. Plus, we always have close games with Essendon. It's just like the law of nature. So I'm still going to tip Sydney regardless, knowing full well you're both going to stab me as soon as this podcast ends. But yeah, that's where I'm leaning.
And Grizz, what's your tip? Keeping in mind, I think you did tip Peter Wright to kick 7. He only got 6, so he did let you down on the weekend.
Yeah, and I did say that Essendon would win, and then you and Jamie told me to stop being ridiculous. So,
yes, we did. We did tell you to live in reality.
Yeah, so I was really close to getting the double up there, but I think
16th, 2 games, 2 wins for the year.
Yeah, look. No, I think Sydney will win. I think it'll be a 3-goal margin.
Ooh.
I think Sydney will win. Not super comfortably, but they'll keep us at arm's reach for the majority of the game.
Not a junk time situation where it's tight, last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter.
Oh, look, that could always be it. Tom Papley could run and headbutt someone's knee and get a free kick and blow the lead out to 18. That's well within the realms of
To be fair, if you play Peter Wright on Tom Papley, he will just run into his knee. That's just like how height works.
Yeah, well, we want to avoid that matchup then because Papley will get a free kick no matter what.
That is very true. Well, look, I'm gonna go against you, Grizz. I'll tip the bomb. I'll be the one that tips the Bombers this week, and we'll see if that comes off. I still think Tom Papley will possibly be played back into form, and if he doesn't, then I'm sure Buddy will kick his usual 5 or 6 against the Bombers. But thank you, Milky, for joining us. Thanks, Grizz, as always. And to our listeners, please remember when you are listening to this, remember to like, subscribe, and comment so that we know what to do for you in the future. Thank you all very much for tuning in.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a dank time.